Welcome. I am Jane Bolts, Regional Coordinator of the JASNA region of the Southwest region of JASNA, the Jane Austen Society of North America. Our presenters today are Dr. Jason Solinger, Associate Professor of English at the University of Mississippi, and his students, Reese Anderson, Alex Bush, Azuria Curry, Marika Hall, Josie Long, Casey McCarthy, Abby Martin, A.G. Robinson, Lucy Rowe, Emily Suh, and Morgan Whited. Marika Hall, one of Dr. Jason Solinger's students, won third place in JASNA Southwest's 2022 Young Filmmakers Contest with a film set in downtown Oxford, featuring a modern-day encounter between Anne Elliot and Frederick Wentworth after their 8-year celebration. I notice that people are still in the waiting room. Dr. Jason Solinger specializes in the literature and culture of the long 18th century. His research includes the early novel, the politics of taste, masculinity studies,
you just cut it off,
and the history of criticism. He has published articles on such topics as 18th century journalism, the rhetoric of cosmopolitanism, and the afterlives of Jane Austen. His book, Becoming the Gentleman, part of Palgrave Macmillan's Global Masculinity series, explains why men and women in the 18th century were haunted by the question of what it meant to be a gentleman. He is currently working on a book about the entangled histories of reading Jane Austen and the discipline of literary studies. He is a passionate teacher who strives to instill in his students lifelong curiosity and a love of books, as well as the confidence to talk about them. Dr. Solinger presented a highly praised breakout session at the 2020 JASNA virtual AGM on anti-historical Austen, from the history of England to Northanger Abbey. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jason Solinger and his students from the University of Mississippi. Please unmute yourself, Dr. Solinger, and everyone else, please continue to mute yourselves. Thank you, Dr. Solinger.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Jane, and everybody else. Thank you for being here. I'm just going to change the view of my screen, maybe. So I'm so happy to be here, but I don't really want this to be about me, because it's not really about me at all. It's really about an experience that I had, that I am having as a teacher, that I'm trying to do different things in the classroom and I'm learning. And it's what I'm learning from my students, which I think matters most here. So today we're gonna talk. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let my students talk. And we're going to talk about the projects that these very smart, very hardworking, very interesting young people worked on. Not this past semester. Which semester was it? It was the semester of the spring of 2022 for the most part. I've got a couple students here too from the fall of 22. And so let me get started. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to share a presentation that we've been working on together. Now, just for what it's worth, I am excited to be speaking at the next AGM with Carolyn Brown, who I think just stepped down as the director of the Mississippi region of JASNA. And we're going to be talking, Carolyn and I, about teaching. It's going to be a different kind of presentation. It's going to be a little bit more theoretical, although we're going to talk about some of our student work as well. But today is really more about hearing from the students. And one thing that I think you'll hopefully walk away from this experience today, you'll walk away with a sense of how young people engage in pop culture, how this Gen Z, can we call you, are reading and are acquiring kinds of literacies that are new to me. So I'm going to start this slideshow, and I'm going to take us through this experience. And I told my students that each of their projects, they had like 5 to 8 minutes, and I think I already wasted 4. And so I'm going to try not to go too long so that the students don't make fun of me. So let's call this College Students Inspired by Austen, and it's a semester in literary experimentation. And I think it was, we'll hear from our students, my students, but I think they'll say that it was experiments for them too. So let me move this slide. So this is just a little picture of the top of a flyer that I was distributing around campus when I wanted to, before this class, before registration for this class. Sometimes I try to drum up business on campus by sitting in a lawn chair and just hand out flyers to try to get students into my classes. I'm always trying to sort of expand the numbers of students that are studying literature. I'm always trying to expand the number of students that are becoming English minors and majors. And it's possible that some of the students in this group today may have taken a flyer from me while I was sitting somewhere on campus. So I called this class Reading Jane Austen for Fun, for the reason that I wanted to very deliberately inject some fun into the academic study of a classic author. And of course, somebody like me, an English professor, I like to think that the academic study of literature, that literary criticism, that the discipline of literary studies is always fun. But when I say that I wanted to inject fun into the classroom, I actually wanted to incorporate some of the experience of reading Jane Austen that happens in Janeite communities and among JASNA members. I'm going to try to mute somebody's phone. I wanted to bring a little bit of fun into this classroom. I said Jane, do you see the phone to me? Thank you. Anyway, this is from my syllabus, the language that you see on the screen right now. And this is the kind of the tone I wanted to set in this class. I wanted to kind of take Jane Austen off of her classic iconic pedestal and make it clear that Jane Austen has fan cultures, that Jane Austen is part of pop culture, and that we were going to do a kind of reading and have experiences in the academic classroom that we don't normally have. If you also look at the bottom of the language here, I wrote on my syllabus and on my flyer for the class, this class will offer the opportunity to participate virtually in these communities and experiences through Jane Austen Society of North America programs. It's your chance to create Austen-related content for an expansive audience. So, from the very beginning, I was hoping that students might create Austen-related work for the wide world of Austen fans. And so that's what we tried to do. And we did have some Zooms during the semester with some JASNA folks and some directors of JASNA, including Susie Wampler, who was the director of this region at the time. She shared a little bit of her experience in the world of JASNA. And I keep pressing the wrong button to advance my slides. Now, a big part of this class was creating student-designed projects. And by student-designed projects, I mean, I didn't assign any essays at all. Essentially, I had a set of guidelines, and I didn't share that with you today, and perhaps I should have, but that essentially said, listen, just create whatever you want. If that's a movie, create a movie. If that's something in social media, do that. If you want to create a game, if you want to create some of the recipes of food that you encounter in these novels, do that. And I also tried to stress that, look, many of you are not English majors. Many of you have specific, professional aspirations. Some of you have hobbies that have nothing to do with what you're studying. It's okay to do a project, create some Austen-related work that incorporates the skills that you need in the profession that you're aspiring to enter, or that maybe exploits the hobby that you're involved in. So again, this is language from my syllabus. What kind of work will we do? What kind of work do you want to do? What are you ready to create? Fan fiction sequels, Regency or Regency revival party games, Austen-inspired TikToks, Austen-centric social media, podcasts, films, dramatic adaptations, parodies, scholarly presentations, interviews with superfans, annotated bibliographies, recipe books, advertising campaigns, t-shirt and jewelry lines. What are you ready to bring into this world? And among the learning outcomes, this last one that I've highlighted, you will develop the artistic, academic, or proto-professional skills necessary to realizing your custom design projects. That was really at the center of what I was hoping to do. What this is called, by the way, there's a name for this in pedagogical theory. It's called authentic assessment. I wanted to use authentic assessment in the classroom, something that is really talked about in pedagogy theory. It's something that's talked about in the discipline of education. I first learned about authentic assessment actually from a graduate student that had taken one of my seminars, who was actually an education graduate student, and she and I had some conversations about authentic assessment. And I wanted to use that in the classroom. And what is authentic assessment? Well, essentially, authentic assessment is work that is authentic. It's work that is not, strictly speaking, so narrowly defined. It's not just academic. It's work that is practical, and it's the kind of work that you might do in the real world in a job after college. When we talk about authentic assessment, I mean, and this is like a widely researched area of pedagogy. And there's a lot of books out there. There's a lot of articles about authentic assessment. There's a lot of competing definitions, I think, of authentic assessment too. This is one that I thought I'd share. It's from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, from their teaching lab. An authentic assessment evaluates if the student can successfully transfer the knowledge and skills gained in the classroom to various contexts, scenarios, and situations beyond the classroom. So authentic assessments can include a myriad of assessments, experiments, presentations, simulations, role plays, all kinds of projects, debates, discussions. But essentially, when we're talking about authentic assessment, we're talking about work that, again, students have to do, that they will do when they leave the university. And I think it's easier to understand what authentic assessment is in fields that are outside of the liberal arts, especially in vocational fields. So here's some examples of authentic assessment in nursing, to provide a case study of a patient and ask students to assess and create a plan of care. In business, you might develop a business plan. Public affairs or service learning courses might have students do a kind of work that involves looking at how a community agency can impact a particular challenge in the world. So it's easy to understand authentic assessment, I think, outside of literary studies. Inside of literary studies, it's a little bit harder. And the reason why I think authentic assessment is so important to bring into the literature classroom, well, it's partly because we are losing majors, not just here at the University of Mississippi. I mean, English is a liberal arts that is not as popular as it was 20 or 30 years ago. There's a lot of reasons for that. But one of them is that we live in a world, college is very expensive, and parents and students worry about what are they going to do with their liberal arts degree? What are they going to do with their degree? What's going to happen after college? In English, we've said for years, and it's true, I mean, this is true. We say, well, you can do so much with an English degree. You can do anything with an English degree. And we talk about all the skills that you acquire in English classes. And I passionately believe in that. But we need to put, I think, our money where our mouth is, in the sense that, like, we need to sort of make those paths out into the world more concrete and easier to spy, easier to sort of latch onto, whether that means sort of connecting students in the liberal arts to careers, whether that means networking, professional networking, but it also means maybe doing work in the classroom that is more expansive than just writing analyses of literature or doing a kind of literary criticism, which is important and such valuable work, especially if you're going to be a literary critic, especially if you're going to go on to graduate school and become, say, an academic. But not everybody wants to do that. So how do we sort of show, how do we demonstrate, how do we help students to connect what they do in the classroom to other kinds of work? And one way to do that is authentic assessment. So that's what we did. And this picture is, I'm sure some of the students here were thinking, well, I didn't think you would ever show that picture anywhere. This is a picture of a conference that we had, and it almost looks like I'm photo bombing, like I don't belong in that picture. Hold on. I'm at the edge here with Carolyn Brown, who's the director of the Mississippi region of the Jane Austen Society of North America. We had a student conference here at the university, and it was the inaugural student conference on Jane Austen. And we connected with Carolyn's class from a Jackson area high school. And the students planned this conference. I mean, they literally did everything. They did the program, they made the program brochure, they did the advertising, they participated in it, they controlled everything to do with the organization and the implementation of this academic conference that happened. And in fact, there was a write-up in the Liberal Arts magazine on campus that was authored by one of the students in our class. So that itself, that kind of administrative work, that kind of planning work, that to me is a kind of authentic assessment. All right. So with all that, I took a lot of time. Let's hear from some of our students, and it's my pleasure to introduce Reese Anderson and Marika Hall, who produced Austen films.
All right, thanks, Dr. Solinger. I'm Marika.
I'm Reese.
It's nice to see all of you. Thanks for coming. I'm in secondary ed English. We're both juniors. Those are some of our favorite books. Yeah, Reese.
Yeah, so before taking Dr. Solinger's class, I'd read Pride and Prejudice and seen a few adaptations of it, but he helped me develop my taste for her, for sure.
I had just seen the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, which I feel a lot of our class had seen before, but I hadn't actually read any of her work, so I was excited for it, and it was definitely a whole world that I did not know existed before this class. So
yes, and when tasked with the authentic assessment, we decided to I'm a hobbyist actor, and Marika also loves films, and so we decided that we just wanted to make 3 to 5 minute short films based on moments that inspired us in the 3 novels that we read in his class. And In Town, the one that Marika won 3rd place for in the JASNA Southwest contest, was based on
Persuasion.
Yes,
yeah.
Persuasion.
So can you go to the next slide, Dr. Solinger?
Yep.
I have just some photo stills for you guys as a reference.
Mhm.
So our first film that we made was like based on Pride and Prejudice, and I feel like we were just sort of learning how to like put the film together, learning how to like think of Jane Austen in a different context, like outside of the classroom. And so it was like a lot of fun to make, but definitely like a learning experience, a learning curve.
Yes, because well, we're student filmmakers, our budget is tiny, and we had but one camcorder to use. And so
Yeah.
that's what we were working with, and we didn't have a lighting team or any of that, obviously. So each one was a technical challenge in its own right, especially because one was filmed outside and then the well, two were filmed outside and one inside. So
Yeah. So the just thinking about like, I feel like the Emma production was a lot of fun. We roped in some of our guy friends to like play the various bachelors, and just sort of thinking about like, how would Emma be like in a modern day context? And I think that was sort of like the beginning question for like all of these projects for us, was like, how do we see like these characters which are like so widely adored and loved like in a more modern setting?
yeah, in a context more familiar to us and our peers. So, because that was one of the initial questions that Dr. Solinger asked us is, how can Austen's work be relevant and like revolutionary in the 21st century? And so, yeah, we just modernized a few of her moments.
Yeah, that we felt were relatable and fun.
Yes.
And so yeah, I think my favorite project was probably In Town, because we got to work, or I just took Reese and Jack, who was like our other big star, a real champ for acting in all of our stories. But we just sort of took them to downtown Oxford and filmed there, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, because Oxford
yeah.
is known for its downtown square, and so it was a lot of fun to shoot a project on it. But yeah, it was just the two of us, and we had a loose script, but the rest of it was improvised pretty much. And I had a lot of fun embodying Anne, and Marika is awesome to work with. So
Well, they make it easy, but yeah, really all of these characters are what inspired our work. And just thinking about like the qualities of these characters that we liked a lot, like specifically with the persuasion one, I just loved how awkward that Anne and Wentworth felt reading it. And I was like, that is what I want to like bring to a modern audience, is like that sense of awkwardness between like exes and like kind of friends, and like working back into like a relationship.
yeah, like a rekindling with the old flame, but and it's really awkward at first. And we wanted to capitalize on that awkwardness, and it made for a funny little film, I think.
Yeah, and just like very briefly, like thinking about like what sort of I guess like film styles like encapsulate like some of those awkwardness flavors, and we both were like Wes Anderson, so like
Yes.
everything is sort of a little 60s mod vibe, and like bright colors, like pastel. We tried to make it
Yes.
symmetrical
and I think the stilted dialogue kind of lent itself to his style as well. So
so that's sort of someone we drew on. But yeah, it was a lot of fun just to like reimagine these characters in a world without like necessarily the courtship laws that like governed their culture. And so just imagining sort of like a modern context in which like the dating world is like, one, much different, and like two, less structured than it was. So yeah, that's just sort of like how we got to where we were.
yeah, that's how we approached Austen.
Yeah, so we're happy to talk more in the Q&A, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I'm struggling with the Google Slides. So thank you, Reese and Marika, so much. And the links to all the work is in the chat. And also, I think, you know, the Marika won, you know, an award at the Austin Film Competition, through the Austin Film Competition, but with the link, you get the original film, which has 36 more seconds. So it's like the director's cut. All right. I'm very happy to introduce Alex Bush and Josie Long, who really sort of embraced the spirit of this class.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with you all today. My name is Alex Bush, and this is Josie. I'm a psychology and general business major, and I will be graduating in the spring. And then my favorite book is called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Dr. Carol Dweck.
Hi, everyone. I'm Josie. I'm a biology major with a minor in English. I'm also graduating in the spring, and my favorite book is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Yeah. So for Alex and I, neither of us had much, if any, exposure to Jane Austen before taking the class. So when we were tasked with creating a project that could connect Austen's work to modern day society, we really had no idea what direction we would go into.
Yeah, and so one night we sat down and we were trying to think of ideas. We went off on a tangent about our favorite YouTube channels, and we were also talking about what we should cook for dinner that night. So we had the idea to combine our project with Jane Austen and one of our favorite things, which is food.
Yeah, so then we decided to create the YouTube channel, which is called A Hunger for Literature. And in each video, we would select a dish from the novel that we were reading, and we would try to make it ourselves while we discussed the novel. So from Pride and Prejudice, we made the white soup. From Emma, we made apple tarts. And then from Persuasion, we made bath buns.
And we basically envisioned our viewers to be people who love to read and explore the different periods or worlds that literature offers. And each week they would read the week's novel and then watch us prepare the dish that was mentioned in the novel.
Yeah, and our vision was to incorporate as many Jane Austen, like Regency era elements that we could into our videos. So we'd always have Regency era music playing in the background. We tried our best to use like authentic Regency era recipes. And we also would try to be like having an in-depth discussion of the novel while our food was cooking. We would call that the simmering thoughts segment. And we just wanted our videos to show readers that you could discuss literature while having fun and enjoying like another passion.
I think we definitely had a really great time making these projects, and they allowed us to collaborate and work on different skills such as filming and editing, similar to what Reese and Marika said. And video editing and filming isn't typically involved in college coursework. We usually have tests, papers, and maybe a presentation. So overall, I really enjoyed and appreciated the uniqueness of Dr. Solinger's class. And I had a great experience with not only reading, but also diving into Austen's work for the first time. So I really enjoyed the class.
These two worked, very well together. There's several collaborative projects amongst this group. People and just like life, right? Sometimes the work requires collaboration, and sometimes it might not. And collaboration was an option on every single project. So if you wanted to do something that required collaboration, if you wanted to work with others, if it made sense to work with others, that was an option for every single project. I'm little surprised that that Alex and Josie decided today to feature the white soup when forgive me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that was like your least enjoyed recipe. I think I remember a line, well, it tastes better than it smells. So at any rate, yes, very good work. Did I interrupt you guys, or were you done?
No, we're all good. But yeah, the
All right.
white soup was definitely not the best one. We had to take hard-boiled egg yolks and kind of just make them all weird, and Josie was not enjoying that. So, but it was fun. So yeah. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. So, Azuria Curry, it's my pleasure to introduce Azuria, who actually did a lot of different projects, but she did create this fashion series over the course of this class, and that involved her siblings and some friends, and it was really sort of a joy to watch.
Thank you, Professor Solinger. I'm Azuria. My major is secondary English education. I'm going to be graduating in the May of 2024, so I'm a junior. And my favorite book is A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest Gaines. My project this go around, one of my projects was entitled What Austin's Men Are Wearing in 2022. The project is made up of 3 different parts, which I'll talk about all of the parts, but you click the next slide. So the first part was a vlog. It was a thrifting vlog. And you might be wondering, what is thrifting and what is a vlog? Great question. So thrifting is basically you go to like a secondhand shop or a vintage shop and you dig for good finds, for good clothes. It really becomes an entire experience. Sometimes it takes a really long time to find good things, but it's really fun and it's a fun thing to do with your friends. So that's why I dragged, my brother and sister and my friends with me along on this project. And then a vlog, the best way I can describe it is just like talking to the camera like it's your best friend, or just talking to yourself, really. That's how I envisioned it when I did it. And putting the two together and creating a thrifting vlog, it just kind of seemed ideal to me, because Professor Solinger told us to create projects that we enjoy doing. And, I never had a professor look at me and tell me to just do what I want, but he is a little off his rocker. So here I am, and here's the project. So it was really fun for me. I think the rest kind of just fell into place. The whole idea was that I just took characters, like their traits and their personalities, and I transformed them into modern day people with different fashion aesthetics. So you can go to the next slide. So the second part of this project was a blog. I just screenshotted it and put it up there so you guys can kind of look at it. But I wanted to be sure that I was explaining my fashion choices completely. So I just kind of wrote why I put them in what I put them in, because I also like writing and a blog seemed ideal. I just wrote out what the aesthetic of each character was and what they'd be wearing in 2022 and why. It was also a lot of fun because I love making graphics and I got to do that in this blog portion. And I'm proud of the outcome. So next. The third part were TikToks. So to tie it all together, I basically made TikToks on the social media platform TikTok because I wanted to have like a final reveal of all the clothes that I found. In the middle, I'm wearing that shirt right now. I got to keep the clothes and I wear them all the time, really. So it was a lot of fun. And I was just kind of being silly and allowing myself to be carefree because I am so used to having just essays thrown at me. But this class really did allow for a creative outlet. And because I want to be a teacher, I'm going to take a lot of this with me into my future classroom so I can also implement ways for my students to be creative, because I found myself learning a lot more and enjoying Austin a lot more because we got to do projects like this. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Azuria. And we have several, I see Azuria, Marika, AG. There's a few people who are going into education and gives me great hope for the future. Also, there's a few people that are pre-med here that also gives me great hope for my own personal future. So at any rate, great work here. And what was cool about this was it was just like multimedia, and probably like a lot of you in the audience, I learned a lot about sort of multi-platform sort of communication. So thank you, Azuria. And again, all the links to all the projects are shared in the chat. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Abby Martin and Casey McCarthy, who were actually in my a continuing Austen, the next Austen class, which took place this past fall, where we did 3 different novels. And I'll hand it off to Abby and Casey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Abby Martin. I'm an entrepreneurship and English major, and my previous experience with Austen was watching the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie with my mom, and afterwards, which she made me read the novel to see if it was similar at all. And my partner for all of the projects that I did in the fall semester was Casey McCarthy.
Hello. Yeah, it was great working with you. I'm also an English major with a creative writing minor.
And my favorite book at the moment is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I have read Northanger Abbey previously in high school for school, and then I read Pride and Prejudice, but for fun, not academically. So with this class, I was able to read Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice from an academic point of view, which was really valuable. And I'm a senior graduating in this May, so exciting. But here's our project.
We decided to do a podcast, but we made it a little different. We wanted to actually like walk as we were recording our podcast, and then map out the trail along the way, so that way you could like visually see where we were walking. We called it The Nature of Pride and Prejudice because we were going to be walking in nature. But it took us a long time to come up with this idea, because after rereading the novel, we noticed the heavy emphasis on walking and how it was such an important part of Elizabeth's character. And we wanted to figure out a way, like a project that could incorporate that into whatever creative work we decided to do. And it took a long time to figure out the perfect way to incorporate it, and lots of debate, but we decided doing a podcast and talking about the novel as we were walking through nature would be the best way to do this. And also, we figured it would also be a healthy use of our time and the perfect way to pay homage to the novel itself, especially in a time after the recovery from the pandemic and all the lockdowns. It was a good way to encourage listeners to walk with us, which felt like a good way to connect with our audience and help them get some exercise. And essentially, we were following Elizabeth Bennet's footsteps, if you will, to discuss the novel. And for the podcast itself, we chose not to script our podcast so that conversations would be really organic and friendly and open and something that people could connect with. But we did prepare numerous quotes in advance to reference to move along our conversation about the novel as we were talking, since we felt like it would be the best way to speak to our audience. And we wanted to demonstrate in our discussions the intersection between us and Austen, like how some things are so similar, even though there's like this big time and cultural change in between, using some examples from our own lives to make the connections in our discussions. And we talked about themes in the novel, like walking and socialization, and making connections from the events depicted by Austen to things relevant in our lives today, and reveal things about our own lives and practices that we may not have noticed or understood otherwise without like that context of our past culture and how we are now. For example, like people often come together over meals for socialization and courtship in Austen's books, just like we do today for like dates and potlucks to get to socialize with each other. And additionally, engaging in physical activity like walking helps us to clear our minds and process things, just like Elizabeth. It's good for you.
Definitely. And so we have a total of 3 podcast episodes where we kind of separate it by topic, but we found that a lot of our topics kind of emerged and mixed together, which also added on to the authentic conversation style of our podcasts. Additionally, we made a Spotify and an Instagram. So our Spotify is a playlist, and it's a multitude of genres, so everyone can have a little something for them. But ideally, the idea of it was to have something that our listeners could listen to on walks of their own, that excuse me, where the songs relate to primarily Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, who we focused our conversations on in our podcast. And so we have some classical music, some alternative indie, pop, rock, blues, hip hop, rap, just everything. And some we took right from the actual movie of Pride and Prejudice, the soundtrack. And so then our Instagram, you're kind of looking at what is featured on our Instagram currently. We have maps of our walks that we took on campus and around campus, so our followers could follow along to make it more immersive. But also we took photos of what we were seeing on the walk and of us also, so they could kind of see through our eyes and follow along with us. And we encouraged our followers, if they were Ole students, to take the same path, or if they aren't, which we assume that they aren't, would take walks of their own and think about our podcast or listen along. So that was a good way to connect with our followers. And we proudly have 54 Instagram followers of fellow Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice lovers. So that's a great boost to our project and something we were not expecting, but hoping for. And it was just a great outcome to see that something we put out into the world actually had a follower system of people who were looking for something that we produced, and we happily provided it for them. So we tried to make it both intellectually stimulating and also just a fun conversational based casual kind of project for people to just enjoy at their leisure.
Our purpose with this project was to create an immersive and interactive experience with our audience and encourage people to just get back out there. And additionally, we also wanted to make the connection between then and now Austen to us. In the end, we wanted to establish a meaningful connection to both Austen and her works and our modern audience. Overall, we're very happy with what we put together. I really thought we got some very beautiful pictures that we posted on our Instagram. As you can probably tell from some of the pictures, it was autumn. It was a good time of year, maybe a little bit cold, but at least we didn't really get sweaty because of that. But we got to visit cool spots that we might not have ordinarily, like we walked all the way the path to Roanoke from our university museum. And we also managed to successfully connect with our audience with, as Casey mentioned, a surprising number of followers. We were not expecting to receive that many followers, but in the end, we were very happy with what we put together and what we were able to accomplish.
Definitely. And I love how hands-on these projects were because, like we've discussed before, just something hands-on, creating something has really taught me more and allowed me to retain a lot more information rather than sitting down and consuming information by reading and writing, which are also both beneficial, but I think something hands-on and more interactive was definitely very beneficial. And it allowed us to interact with an audience, to learn how to use different forms of social media and other online platforms and communicate with them better, and to exercise and stimulate our brains for better intellectual conversations, and how to brainstorm and create an original project or product where there's an actual demand for it, and prepare an in-depth close read of a novel to deliver it naturally and casually, for better digestion of the material for our followers. And how to deep dive into Janeite culture was really interesting. And how to revolutionize the way that people think about Austen was definitely a main goal of our project. And how to master a new medium. So thank you.
Thank you, Abby and Casey. I was going to say that one of the things that you see with a lot of the student projects that were done in these classes is you see how modern content production really does take place over multiple platforms. What Casey and Abby are doing is something you see, for instance, I'm a Yankee fan, so I listen to like New York Yankees podcasts, and those podcasters will have their YouTube channel, and they'll have their articles, they'll have their blog. And so that's what's happening with this sort of with this content production over multiple platforms. This walking and talking podcast is such a good idea. I think a lot of theories as to why it works so well, but gosh, it was a great podcast. And it's a testament to the chemistry, I guess, between these two also. That just the conversation between Abby and Casey was just great. I mean, it was like really fun to listen to what they had to say about Austen, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot from all of these people, and that's what's cool when you say to your students, like, just design what you want to design. You really put yourself in a position to learn a lot, and so I'm grateful to everybody for that. So up next, let me move along. Meet A.G. Robinson, another brilliant person and great content producer. A.G., it's all yours.
Yes, my name is Anna Grace, or AG. I'm a senior at the university. I'm going to be a teacher, but I'm also interested in policy, so education reform and all that kind of good stuff. like I said, I'm graduating in May. My favorite book has recently become Writers and Lovers by Lily King. And the project that I decided to take on for this presentation is a video essay that I made after reading Northanger Abbey. And I basically decided to take the argument that Austen makes about metatextual elements and see where the through lines are to modern day fan fiction. So Dr. Solinger, if you'll change the slide. So where this sort of all came from is I sort of became obsessed. Maybe that's a little dramatic. I became very fixated on the parts of Northanger Abbey where I felt like Austen was sort of ranting about books. She was like, why are we as a society thinking that Gothic literature or the novel is not as respectable as periodicals or any other thing? And I really got behind that argument. And I felt like I could apply it to my life. And so that is what led to this project. And once I decided that that's what I wanted to do, I didn't really know exactly how I wanted to go about that. I had a lot more questions than I did answers about this project. And I think that's what made it really fun for me, is it was kind of just like a genuine exploration of my experience reading this novel. And I'm a relatively like normal consumer of video essays on YouTube. I think they're fun. They're something easy to put on in the background, sort of like a modified podcast. And it's also where a lot of social commentary lives. For my generation, I feel like. And so I decided to turn it into a video essay, which is exactly what it sounds like. Somebody supporting an argument with all sorts of pictures and documentation, and they're usually like 20 to 30 minutes. So it was fun to do that and be able to make one of my own. If you'll go to the next slide, Dr. Solinger. So I don't want to get too in the weeds of the actual video because it was like almost 20 minutes long, but basically I divided it sort of into 3 sections. So I wanted to talk about fan fiction by itself, like fan fiction culture, the history of fan fiction, which obviously Austen plays a relatively big part in. I mean, there is a lot of Austen fan fiction that exists. And then also compare that to modern day fan fiction, where you sort of see that starting in like the early 2010s with social media and Wattpad and Tumblr and Archive of Our Own and all of these places that really revolutionized fan fiction because it's free and easily accessible to anyone, and very empowering for young people to not only access literature but have the opportunity to write literature. And because the consumer base of fan fiction, at least in this time, like early 2010s, really through to now, it is typically young girls, teenage girls. There is this like girlification of fan fiction in a very similar way that there is or was to Gothic literature, and that is like what Austen is talking about in Northanger Abbey. And so I took both of those and compared them, and tried my best to make sense of my experience as someone who read a lot of fan fiction when I was younger and felt a lot of shame about reading it and didn't ever want to talk to any of my friends. But as I grew up, I was like, we were all doing this. Why weren't we talking about it? And take Austen, who I love reading, and be able to impact my own life and like make sense of my past experiences doing so. So if you'll go to the last slide, Dr. Solinger. And so my main takeaways from this was, most importantly, that Austen's fiction still matters, and like I said, can really help us understand our lived experiences. And like, it was really cool to realize that the way that I'd been feeling about something that was really important to me as a teenager is something that lots of women and lots of people have experienced before, and people will continue to experience. Also, I really truly felt like I lived out the authentic assessment. Like, I don't know, I felt like I lived it out because I always loved watching video essays, and I was like, oh, that would be fun, but I had no reason to make one. And so this was a good reason to have make one. And I also am excited about the prospect of being able to provide my future students with opportunities like these to do things that they care about and not just write a paper that has no meaning to their life. It will not matter in 10 years. I feel like I will remember the projects that I've done in this class more than any others. And lastly, I think what was most interesting that I did not expect to learn from doing this project was that loving literature is not black and white. You can simultaneously love something and still think that it needs to be improved or changed. And I think that that's something that I learned from Austen, but also learned from fan fiction, because like it's not all great, but there is a time and a place for it, and loving it is an interesting experience. But yeah.
Thank you, AG. You know, in AG, like actually probably everybody here, but I just do remember saying this to AG over a couple classes, like, wait, what is that? Wait, how does the internet work? You know, what's happening in social media? What exactly is that? And I've learned a lot about pop culture and pop cultural literacies from AG over the past year. So thank you. And we're gonna proceed. And I'm very happy to introduce a very interesting intersection of STEM and literature, a new direction in literary studies, I think. So I'm happy to introduce Lucy Rowe, who, because she's on the equestrian team, I think is zooming in from Atlanta. So take it away, Lucy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. As Dr. Solinger said, my name is Lucy Rowe. I am in Atlanta in a hotel, so if you hear like traffic or anything, I'm so sorry about that. Please bear with me on that. I am a junior, so I'll be graduating in May of 2024 from the university. I am a biochemistry BA, and then I also have an English minor. I'm hoping to work in the field for a few years and then hopefully go back to school to study law. So yeah, one of my favorite books is Beloved by Toni Morrison. I've taken a few classes at the university and had the opportunity to read it multiple times. So that's been something that I've enjoyed doing, is reading it each time and, you know, learning something new. But my project on Austen focuses on biodiversity in her novels, and I took a quantitative approach to studying Austen, which I think is really interesting, and it was really fun. You can move to the next slide, Dr. Solinger. So although I have some data and some results from my research on the left, the main thing that I wanted to focus on is just the process and like what I learned from that process. And being someone who is interested in fieldwork and literature, something that was really important to me was to kind of use this class as a platform to kind of dip my toes into research, specifically interdisciplinary research, which I think a lot of undergraduate students are really kind of intimidated by, because you have to communicate with different departments, maybe research things that you aren't normally comfortable with or you don't have background on. So for my project, I really wanted to focus on Austen's use of biodiversity in nature, specifically looking at the terminology in her book and how prevalent that was. So that's where the quantitative approach came in. Dr. Solinger and I stumbled upon a study by a researcher at a university in Germany named Lars Langer, and he basically took a collection of a couple thousand different books and did a lemmatization of the novels and books he picked in a sample and studied how abundance and richness of biodiversity terminology changed from 1700s to up until 1900s, and if that had any historical context in terms of industrialization and the rise of the novel, in terms of people's exposure to nature and how they were thinking about the world. And, you know, if you're not surrounded by nature and living in nature, you might have less vocabulary surrounding those terms. So in her novels, it was pretty interesting to find that all three of them seem to have a similar overall use. But in terms of abundance and richness of the terms, Emma ended up being the most using the most biodiversity terms. And in this process, I had to work with undergraduate students, graduate students in the computer science department. Dr. Solinger connected me with them, and they actually created an algorithm based on Langer's study. And Langer was kind enough to offer, you know, additional information from his study to the graduate students. And I don't know anything about coding, so I don't really know the details of their code, but they did a great job, and they were able to provide me with the results. And then I went through and kind of analyzed those results, and reached a few conclusions about her books, mainly that because these are happening kind of right before the peak of industrialization. Langer noticed that these terms kind of tapered off when industrialization happened, but her novels seem to be kind of an outlier. In overall, research, her terms were more abundant and rich than any other time period he studied. So that kind of makes her revolutionary in this way too. So I really enjoyed the process of like looking at her novels and being able to take a quantitative approach to it, which I'm very much a math brain person, even though I have an English minor. And so that was fun for me to be able to explore something that I was interested in, and that I think taught me a lot of soft skills in terms of like working with different people and being, not afraid to reach out and, advocating for myself. And so yeah, it was a really great experience, and I really enjoyed the process. Is mostly the thing that I think I learned the most from.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, Lucy was, walking around campus trying to find people to help her, and she did a great job. And I remember we had a conversation at one point where we were talking about contacting that scholar in Europe about his work and having some access to some of his data. And we were just like, well, what can it hurt? What can it hurt to try? And it worked out. It was really, really fun to see that process unfold. Well, thank you, Lucy. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Emily Suh, who created a great podcast and a great podcast concept. And I'm happy to say is also now working on her honors college thesis is on Jane Austen. So I don't know if her experience in the class influenced that or not, but here is Emily. Take it away.
Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. My name is Emily Suh, and I'm majoring in English and minoring in linguistics. I am a junior, so I am graduating in May. My favorite book is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. It's a book that I hold close to my heart. And yeah, I did this project was actually my first project out of the 3 that I had for Dr. Solinger's class. So this is a podcast called Two Women and Fictional Men, which is a very broad, big title. And that's the link to the podcast. You can literally find it on Spotify. So just go into Spotify, type in Two Women, Fictional Men. It'll pop right up. Can you turn to the next slide, Dr. Solinger? There we go. So like I said, this is the first project I did for him. And unfortunately, I only have 1 episode out. Because I dragged my friend Melody along with me. She and I both have a love for romance, and because we love romance, we love Pride and Prejudice. So my big idea with this podcast was actually not just focusing on Jane Austen, but just romance literature as a whole. And taking these male characters, hence fictional men, and talking about them. We wanted this podcast to be very much like a conversational podcast, something you could listen to while chilling, doing the laundry, whatever. It's just very conversational. So we were just talking about what, in this episode in particular, we talked about what made Darcy this ideal male character that a lot of people in the Jane Austen fandom, if not just romance as a whole, look up to, as much as he is low-key a terrible human being until the end. It's something that we all, I think, it takes a lot of critical thinking to figure out, well, why do we like this kind of person? Why not someone like Mr. Bingley, who is like golden retriever all the way around? And this audience, the audience that we were looking towards was mainly people our age, but I mean, for anyone as well. And it was super accessible. I used a website called Anchor, which is also done by Spotify, and it was it was very difficult. I did not know how difficult making a podcast was going to be until I did this. And I'm so thankful that Dr. Solinger was there for me, supporting the crazy ravings of a 19, 20-year-old. But it happened. And so yeah, that was mostly what happened with my podcast. Unfortunately, not many people have listened to it, but that's okay. Maybe the numbers will go up after today, and I hope they will. But it's like an hour-ish long, but it's okay. It's just like a light listen. It's something that I wanted people who were interested in Jane Austen to be able to easily digest and be able to not only just think of Jane Austen as just Jane Austen, but actually also think about it, synthesize the ideas of Jane Austen with other tropes that are very popular in the romance culture today.
That's what's one of the things that's so great about this podcast, is that it is focused on a trope that's, you know, part of romance literature, both film and fiction. And so, I mean, to me, the thing that was great about this was you could expand this podcast, and it could be something that has hundreds of episodes. And if Emily were to choose to do that, and notice also she collaborated with somebody that wasn't in her class, which is cool. I mean, you know, why not? If you have a friend that's ready to help you and happy to talk about Austen, go for it. So thank you, Emily. Last but not least is Morgan Whitehead. Morgan has been a student of mine in a few classes. She's another one of these talented STEM people that's also in English, and her project is also STEM related, like Lucy Rose. So Morgan, take it away.
Thanks, Professor Solinger. So I'm Morgan Whitehead. I'm a senior at the University of Mississippi. I'm pursuing a degree in biochemistry, and I'll minor in English and biology. And I anticipate graduating this May. My favorite book there listed is probably The Book Thief. It's a tight race. As for my project, it's called the Physic Pocket Companion. Also, we met for rehearsal earlier this week, and Professor Solinger let me know that my project was unique in that it lent itself to shareability in a PowerPoint presentation, maybe the best of all of us, which felt like a challenge. So I'm going to deliver that to you today as well as I can in 5 to 8 minutes. I created a sort of pocket guide, which from my understanding is the sort of affordable published guide that became popular in the 18th century, whether it be for travel or for etiquette. At the top, like, upon reflection, I'm proud of the work that I undertook, the project that I produced. To sort of prepare you, I was inspired by the scene at Netherfield Park where Elizabeth tells Mr. Bingley and his sisters that Jane's condition sort of has worsened when she's staying there. And he presses for Mr. Jones, the apothecary, immediately. And his sisters, in contrast, call for an eminent physician from town. And I'll elaborate on this scene later. My mother's a pharmacist. I'm looking to work in healthcare, like Professor Solinger mentioned. And I think that I'd sort of this timely reading when I was preparing postgraduate applications probably primed my brain and piqued my interest as I read Pride and Prejudice during Professor Solinger's class. Here we go. So there's a quote from Mrs. Bennet about her hardship after Elizabeth refused Mr. Collins's hand in marriage. I found it fitting. So Professor Solinger, you can hit it for me. Thank you very much. So let's take a look at what distinguishes the primary care professions in the 18th century from one another. Let's see, here's my pocket companion, I'll sort of read it to you. For those who seek to abate indifferent health, a guide to medicine in Austen's England. I wrote that a somewhat obscure facet of daily life in 19th century England is the mode by which its inhabitants were inclined or were necessitated by their income to cling to life itself, the financial and social factors which directly affected one's leisure or their survival during times of illness. So if you'll sort of look at the left column, you can sort of refer and think about who you're going to call if you were in the 18th century. So for diseases and for ailments of the body's interior, you'd call a physician. They're the educated near gentry. They're not tradesmen. That's important. So in italics, I have listed sort of their qualifications and their educational requirements. Physicians are university educated members of the Royal College of Physicians. They graduated from usually Oxford, Cambridge, or Edinburgh. They're sort of in flux between gentry and tradesmen. They faced a huge aversion to the manual procedures of surgeons. Costly consults reserved visits for royalty, gentry, and wealthy merchants at their homes. Physicians served the privileged, like I said, like courts, palaces, and estates, and they kept their hands clean. At night, they frequented doctors' clubs, which were basically gambling and drinking sprees among medical practitioners at night. Their work was sparing, it was expensive, they wanted an easy lifestyle. In short, physicians had the clearest idea of what they were doing and often no real mind to do it. So medical doctors sort of roamed from London to country estates like Longbourn, especially after 1703. And that's an important year because that's the year that the monopoly that limited administration of medical advice within 7 miles of London to physician members of the Royal College of Physicians. So it was sort of really exclusive and prestigious. And that monopoly was lifted. Their expertise included disease, diagnosis, prescription. They looked, but they didn't touch. If absolutely necessary, those skills of the surgeon apply, but with a studied but unpracticed air, because again, they had this aversion to touching. They had a distance from their patients. So there in the middle, you'll see surgeons. I wrote that they're adept at dirty work and they treat one's exterior. And for surgery, their qualifications included an apprenticeship. They were members of the Surgeons' Company of London, which was later called the Royal College of Surgeons, and they did not have degrees, unlike physicians. So following dissolution of the Barber Surgeons' Company of London in 1745, freeing surgeons from the disgrace of practicing alongside less educated barbers, barber surgeons sort of fell out of practice in favor of surgery alone. Surgeons' livelihoods lacked the prestige of physicians. Like I said, their services were more affordable. They really worked harder. They made house calls and they offered services that required physical labor and manipulation, which accounted sort of for their lesser status. They fused dentistry, pharmacy, surgery, and diagnosis, as well as they do broken bones, which is as well as can be expected. So their sort of expertise is what we might consider to be a physician's expertise today: wounds, lacerations, burns, rashes, setting fractured limbs, amputation, infant delivery, drilling holes in the skull to release demons, bloodletting to release bad blood, or leeching. And finally, we have the apothecary, which is what we would classify Mr. Jones as in the novel. That's for drugs or whatever that you'd like, really. They're usually apprentice shopkeepers who lacked accreditation and requisite apprenticeship until the Parliamentary Apothecaries Act of 1815, which finally ruled that apothecaries must be granted licensure to practice, and only after examination by the Society of Apothecaries. But remember, Pride and Prejudice was written in 1813, if I'm correct, and it sort of preceded this legislation requiring licensure. And that was the mindset as Jane Austen was writing this novel. Then apothecaries were shopkeepers, and they offered some legitimate remedies alongside really snake oils like perfumes and anti-paralytic ointment. And they peddled all those and more in their shops and sort of administered them without training. But like I mentioned before, the advent of the lifted monopoly on physicians' practices, apothecaries really were able to serve as general practitioners, and they doubled physicians in number and undercut them in cost. So they were sort of on the rise as Jane Austen was writing this novel. They're really traders with no medical certifications. They're socially inferior to physicians, but they're available, and that's important. So their expertise is running shops, and oftentimes, aside from that, very little. So to summarize, for a doctor, you can call him doctor. For a surgeon, you call him Mr. And for an apothecary, you call him if you want to save money. All right. So I think, Professor Solinger, you can move to the next slide. Thank you. So in chapter 7 of Pride and Prejudice, the eldest Miss Bennet receives an invitation to dine with the Bingleys at Netherfield Park. Allow me to set the scene. Caroline Bingley has written Jane an invitation to dine. Mrs. Bennet has devised a brilliant plan, as I'm sure we're all familiar with. There's rain in the forecast, so naturally Jane will forego the carriage and she'll go on horseback. And she knew that the gentleman had taken the chaise to Meryton. So then she naturally had to stay all night at Netherfield Park. The Bingley's invitation was generous, but it was made more generous yet by Mrs. Bennet's fateful directive for Jane to go on horseback. So she went, and the plan works even better than Miss Bennet could have anticipated. A servant brings a note from Jane telling Lizzie that she's fallen ill and that she's seeing Mr. Jones, the apothecary. Of course, Miss Bennet says, people do not die of little trifling colds. As long as she stays there, it's all very well. Naturally, her condition worsened, and Elizabeth came. The apothecary came and tended to Jane, diagnosing her with a violent cold and told her that she should stay in bed. He gave her draughts to drink. All right. And I'm going to sort of read this verbatim. We know that later on, Elizabeth returns to report to the siblings that her sister's condition has worsened. And I'll read this verbatim. Here we go. Bingley urged Mr. Jones's being sent for immediately, while his sisters, convinced that no country advice could be of any service, recommended and expressed to town for one of the most eminent physicians. This she would not hear of, but she was not so unwilling to comply with their brother's proposal, and it was settled that Mr. Jones would be sent for early in the morning. So given the aforementioned sort of echelons of medical practice, that mode of care might be surprising. In that scene, Mr. Bingley calls for the apothecary once again and quickly, while Miss Bingley decries country medicine and recommends a prominent city physician. Elizabeth forswears the latter. But for Jane, in her feverish state, that recommendation of a physician might be the natural one, or it might seem that way. Why then do Elizabeth and Miss Bingley disagree? It seems to me that Miss Bingley, in accordance with the genteel Mr. Darcy, possesses a jaded view of the country life throughout the novel, which she sort of expresses throughout the novel. And such prejudice in a medical context might have arisen or been affected by the monopolies that I mentioned earlier near the city for the sort of esteemed physicians. Such laws, once commonplace yet overturned, might have fostered bias in the uninformed, because this legislation was sort of being developed as Jane Austen was writing the novel. Perhaps Mr. Bingley knew that physicians operated in town and that an apothecary might be able to treat Jane much more quickly. Or he might have been acting prudently, as his fortune might have been gained and maintained by frugality of his family before him. His choice might cement him as a people's patrician, considering apothecaries' growing popularity as general practitioners. Regardless, as Elizabeth was not so unwilling, an informed reader might wonder if her motivation was greater cost. As a daughter of the poorer member of the gentry than any of her hosts, Elizabeth was pretty swift to agree with Mr. Bingley and not his sister. So where she's sick now in the 21st century, Jane might shudder in light of the social stratification that sort of affected her treatment and care and the stigma that surrounded it. All in all, I believe that Austen likely intended to convey class differences in her character's endorsements of certain modes of care. While apothecaries might have been commonplace as general practitioners and even perfectly fine eventually, I think that Miss Bingley's insistence manages to exude simultaneous knowledge of what she considers to be right, as well as a desire to be seen as proper, even more maybe than she intended for Jane to be seen as quickly as possible. Ultimately, we know Jane, that she was seen and she was okay, but it was by the apothecary, which ultimately underscored her family's status as lesser than that of the Bingley sisters, who were seemingly accustomed to the best. And finally, here's why I believe that analysis is useful. So now, as we read this book centuries later, I think it's especially valuable to separate our 21st century ideas of common professions, that of the physician, apothecary, or surgeon, from the realities of those in the 18th century, because now they're totally different. And we understand now how starkly they differ. And I think that's important to understand the stigmas that affected those decisions. And once I understood, and now I understand, the bearing that that had on the characters, it changed my outlook for the entirety of the novel. And that was important to me. I came away with it with a deeper belief that Austen was more well-versed in social issues, and I believe in my first read-through. And I think it's important to take a second look at familiar scenes with what could be a fresh perspective. And really, finally, in summary, I love to write an essay, but this project in this class have been more memorable than a standard essay or a standard course. Maybe more exciting, maybe more challenging in some ways. I really appreciate Professor Solinger. He told us we could take an approach from any discipline, and he was right. He believed in us, and I realized how much value there is at taking another look at a well-loved and well-critiqued work like Pride and Prejudice. I love making the project. I love the class. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Morgan. Definitely last but not least there. And what's really cool about Morgan's project is, again, it's kind of multimedia, right? I mean, you used graphic design in creating that pocket companion, which looks almost like an early 19th century Vade Mecum, a kind of conduct book. And you also did really a kind of organic research that you were interested in, and you opened up the novel by showing how those terms that we might think we understand, physician, surgeon, apothecary, mean something quite different to Jane Austen and her readers. So that was a really kind of an original kind of research you did, and it learned so much from it. All right, that's all we got. We went long. I know we had a lot to talk about. I guess we have 10 minutes for questions, Jane.
Yes, we can go on longer in question
Okay.
if you want to stay.
I've got nothing to do except be in the Zoom all day.
Okay, I'm going to hand this over to Leah to pick up the Q&A. So Leah, please unmute yourself.
Hello, I'm Leah. I'm the JASNA Southwest Secretary, and thank you so much for all the questions. So how I'll do this is I'll copy and paste some of the questions, especially ones that are similar to each other, into the chat, and then I'll read out loud, mute myself, and then allow the participants to answer. Okay, first round of questions. This is a pair that are similar, so bear with me as I copy and paste it. So first question is, for Marika and Reese, would you mind sharing the links to these short films? And also similar question. Let me do that. Sorry.
Just so you know, the link to Marika's film in that she did that won the 3rd place in the JASNA Southwest, yes, Young Filmmakers Contest is available to view on the JASNA Southwest YouTube channel.
And
so just go into JASNA Southwest YouTube and then you can type in her name and it will pop up.
And next one is, can we have copies of the links, podcasts, blogs, TikToks, etc., that were shown in the slides of this presentation?
So just to be clear, that I just put it in the chat again. So this link, if you look at the chat, is a link to a document in Google Drive, a Google document, and it has all the links to all the work right there in that document. So if you just click on that and save that link, you'll be able to look at everything.
Okay, and next round of questions. Let's see. Let me copy and paste this. And then copy this.
Dr. Solinger, do you want to take down screen sharing so we can see you on the full screen? Yeah.
Okay, next 2 questions. So Marika and Reese did a film for each book that you read. Were other students expected to do 1 project per book? And a similar question, were the students all expected to partner up in order to produce content?
So we just felt that we should partner up because making a film is like a group crew effort. So it felt natural for us to partner up, but there were plenty of projects that were individual, so it wasn't a requirement.
Right, we didn't have to collaborate, and everyone did 1 project per book, and we read 3 books throughout the semester.
Thank you for the question.
Oh, all right, next question. Let me go ahead and copy and paste it. All right, so Alex and Josie, what device did you use to film yourselves for the YouTube?
We just used a cell phone. We actually taped our cell phone to our paper towel roll. That was the only thing we could find that was the right height.
Okay, thank you for that little tidbit to make it easier for us potential YouTubers. Okay, next question. Were there any were there any instances where this class turned non-readers into readers or lovers of modern literature into Jane Austen fans?
I don't want to speak for people here, but I will say this. I'm not going to name names, but I think some of the people are here possibly that kind of admitted to, and this is sacrilegious to say in this group, right? That admitted to not really liking Jane Austen very much. But so I will say that sort of the joy of the work, and I'm not gonna name names, but the joy of the work I think shows through anyway. And it's interesting. Do you have to love an author to to reveal something interesting about the author's work, like to learn something, to shed a light on that author's work. You know, my own dissertation director in graduate school would always say that that she learned the most, or she discovered the most about literature and culture studying books that she didn't like reading. But I think there are some Jane Austen fans among this group. But like I said, I don't want to speak for, but I do know that it's possible that not everybody cultivated that love.
I think he's talking about me. But I did take the class twice because the first time I wasn't quite convinced. The second go around, I will say I did learn to love Jane Austen a lot more, thanks to Professor Solinger and these projects.
All right, next question. For Professor Solinger, did you have to show students how to use the various formats, YouTube, podcasts, blogs, etc., or were they already familiar before the class began?
I mean, for the most part, I mean, that's what's cool about trying something like authentic assessment and just saying to your college students, just do what you want. For the most part, people are working with media and technologies that they're already familiar with, or that they're learning independently. I mean, I'm into tech as a teacher. I do teach an online course, and during COVID, I got into the business of making video lectures. So I'm interested in it myself. So I was there to help students if they needed, but I don't know that I helped anybody like in this room with anything really. I mean, we talked about Jane Austen together. So, but I think that's fair to say.
I will say, Abby and I worked on a food blog, and we were new to using the website platform, so we kind of had to figure that out. That is conveniently also posted and linked on our Instagram for our podcast if you wanted to see it too.
I think that was the hard part about doing these projects. He literally just dunked it on us, and we're just like, here are the novels. We read it. Now you do you and go pursue your dreams. And he just kind of left us with that open question. And I remember freaking out. And then one day just going into his office, half crazy, just mid-rave, just sir, I want to make a dating simulator. I think it'll be cool. And he was just he was nice enough to just say, yeah, go ahead. Sounds interesting. Was it a crazy endeavor? Yes. Did it not work? Yes. But he really gave us that, he was just really open to all of these different ideas that we had, really let us have just our creative moments, even though they probably did sound crazy to him, because I think he did also ask what a dating simulator was. And then I had to ask him, I had to explain to him what a dating simulator was.
Yeah, I mean, there were many times, like I said, over the course of the semester where I would say to my students, well, what is that? So that's what's fun about this. If this class was fun for me, reading Jane Austen for fun, one thing that was fun was I got to learn a lot from my students. Now, Emily, pretty much every person here is a very high achieving, hard on herself kind of person. There was a moment where I think there was a little bit of looking for some therapy, but the truth of the matter is she always does great work. And that project that she's talking about, that was a failure. I mean, this gives you an idea. And we did say in this class, we said, it's okay to fail. I don't mean fail the class. You don't want to fail the class. You want to work at the class, but it's okay to try something that just might not work out. That's what life's about, right? And so that game that failed, I mean, it was a game using PowerPoint essentially and links, and it was like a choose your own adventure kind of game. And I mean, there were like over 200 slides in that failed project, right? So, I mean, it was only failed in the sense that I guess like you couldn't actually find your partner or your ideal mate by the end of the game, you know, but it was like a really elaborate project.
Okay, I know we're getting close to running out of time here. So last couple questions. First set, what are examples of biodiversity and nature terms? And is a reference to trees, forests, gardens a biodiversity reference? Or does the reference need to be a specific type of tree, flowers, etc.?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when we were writing the algorithm with the graduate students, we wanted to kind of like make sure that we were eliminating bias. So we actually used a database that had taxonomic terms, and we went from the genus level down to like subspecies. So basically like the term tree would like be marked, but also like a specific type of tree. So like maple or elm. And then the terms themselves are mostly just like flora and fauna terms that are included in taxonomy. So like horse or like rose is also included. Those were like some of the big ones that we saw. So yeah.
Okay, second to last question, if we can fill it. For all the students, what were the biggest takeaways or life lessons you learned from this project?
I feel like we just really enjoyed the process of like having fun with the text, especially one that's like classical and can seem unrelatable or like too distant from where we are. So I guess like my life lesson was like the world is small and everything is a little closer than you might think. So it's not so hard to like relate to someone who lived like so long ago, and it's not so hard to have fun with literature. I love it. So
Yeah, and it was a lesson in like the joy of collaboration, I
Yeah.
guess, because coming together 3 times throughout the semester with my friends to make a cool project that we're proud of, it was awesome. And it was also a cool blending of disciplines for us too, what with literature and film and acting. So a great experience.
Yeah. So just like enjoying the process of it. We love the open-endedness of all the questions and the course. So thumbs up from us.
I think for me, I like to learn how to take what I learned in other classes and use that to fuel my ideas in that class to make the project. Like Casey and I were also in a digital editing, writing, and publishing course at the same time, where we were learning how to like make a physical book and the font choices that to go into in the editing process. And we thought about doing a project like along those lines. That was something we considered doing just to like link it all together. But I found a lot of my courses overlap with each other in like the strangest ways possible. And it's very interesting to me to figure out how to like piece it all together as I'm about to graduate and go into the workforce and have a job of my own where I will have to like use all these skills in tandem. So that's how I realized it.
I would say for me, I have a very similar answer to Marika and Reese. Like it really was about the process, but like more specifically, I think it's also okay to like not know all the answers. And like being someone who's a STEM major, it's, you know, you have find X, or, you know, there's a specific process that you're learning and there is an answer. So sometimes I think in English, that's where non-English majors get lost, is that there's not always a clear direction or path. And, you know, so much of it is open to interpretation. And even though my research was quantitative, like the results themselves and what they say about Austen is really open to discussion and interpretation.
I think also just that English literature isn't just about like writing papers. I know I am an ambassador for the English department here at the university, and I know like a ton of people are like, oh, I don't want to do English. I could never write papers. I can't do those 10-page papers. But English really isn't about those papers. It's about being able to understand, comprehend, critically analyze all different sorts of media, and then be able to share that with the world, and not just in paper form, but also with different types of media that are out there. So like in my case, a podcast or video essays or YouTube videos. English is not just about those papers. It's a way to share the literature around the world with so many people in different ways.
For me, really quickly, Professor Solinger really and truly told us not to be afraid to fail with these open-ended projects, and it was pretty novel. And where that might seem like I might have been able to give him some of my worst work, the work that I did and dared to do is some of my very favorite. He really gave us grace, and like canonical literature is daunting, but I was pretty unafraid, like for once, you know.
Briefly, I'll add on to that and say that I know Abby and I started our first project off making a card game replica of one that already exists. But that was kind of hard to share with an outside audience that wasn't in our class or with our professors. So eventually with the other two projects, we kind of moved on to a food blog and then a variety of social media and podcasts. And it was interesting to really make online platforms new again with different projects and also make them more accessible and learn from that trial and error process.
This is an incredible presentation. We appreciate it and really learned so much from all of you students. And Dr. Solinger, thank you so much for doing this project and all these students for participating.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you all for having us. Thank you, of course, to the students. I mean, obviously, like the highlight of this is their work and their energy and what we can learn from them. You can imagine how, you know, when you're a 50-something-year-old college professor, how much you can like just learn from letting the young people produce content and you know, generate new forms of literacy and connect pop culture and classic literature, and also just it's fun to see them sort of doing things that they enjoy doing. But so it's all them, and so I'm very grateful to these students, of course. And yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and a big hand to all of you students, and thank you, Dr. Solinger. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank
you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Well, we'll be ending this meeting now. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Bye-bye.